My name is Jan Burton, and I'm from Create Boulder. And on behalf of Create Boulder, which is including Deborah Malden, we are so excited and exhilarated to see such a great audience of people who are interested in some sort of a performing arts venue. We apologize for the technical difficulties. They're still working on the connection to the slide presentation that has been put together by these panelists. So thank you for coming. It really shows the interest that we have as a community in arts and culture. And I'd also like to thank many of you who came to the sessions with our panelists on Tuesday. I think I see, yeah. I'd like to introduce a few elected officials in the audience. Bob Yates is a council member. Mayor Aaron Brockett. Matt Benjamin. I saw Tara Rayner, and I saw Lauren Fulkerts walk in as well. Anyone else that I'm missing? Thank you. The role of City Council in what we're trying to take on here is very, very important, and I think you all know that. And the role of the city staff. So we have involved them from the very beginning in the kind of thought process of how we might evaluate this process. And I'd also like to introduce Matt Chesansky, who is the head of the Arts and Culture for the city. And Matt has been instrumental in the last, 10, 12 years? 9. Okay. 9 years in really bringing the arts community together and has made so much progress from when he started. So thank you so much, Matt. When Create Boulder thought about this idea, this is an idea that has been done before, that has been worked on seriously by a number of people. And I'm going to call it the 2014 committee, which included Judy Reed and a number of other people who I don't see in the audience right now, Sasha Millstone, Margot Broccoli, Joe Rame, and they worked on this process. Nothing has really come of that. And many of us have been asking ourselves, why has nothing come of that process? Wonderful. So what you're going to see is a new approach. And when Create Boulder hired Michael LaCasey, who I will introduce in just a second, to begin this process, we did not lay down what we wanted to have happen. We did not give them the conclusion. We laid out problem statements, and there's a paper spread around the room that has got the problem statement. So we didn't define what we wanted the outcome to be. And that's very important for everyone here to realize that. Because this group of panelists are incredibly brilliant. And by interviewing about 40 people on Tuesday, they've come with their own suggestions about what the City of Boulder should do. The City of Boulder means all of us. It's the community who will make this happen. Clearly, City Council and mayors and city staff will be a role in this, particularly Matt's team. But it's up to us to decide what we want. It's up to us to step up and make it happen. So, welcome. Thank you for being here. The process is we've got about an hour presentation, then Q&A, and then we'll, for those of you who would like to and have the time, please go downstairs. We'll have a little bit of a happy hour in the middle of the day. And then you can give us one-on-one feedback. And you have, I see many of the arts leaders here. Be great for you to talk with them, get their impressions. And so again, thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce now Michael LaCasey, who we hired as the panel lead and the moderator. Thank you, Michael.
All right, how's everybody doing out there?
All right.
My first question was going to be, who hates PowerPoint presentations? And I withdraw that question. So Jan asked me to introduce this session, and talk about the process a little bit and a little bit about my background. We do have bios of all the panelists here, so I don't need to belabor that. But for 16 years, I ran the Colorado office of the Urban Land Institute, and a lot of our work involved advisory panels with communities around the state. And this whole process is really based on that. And the idea is to bring in experts who are disinterested to study a problem. By disinterested, I mean they don't have a financial interest or a personal interest in a site or an issue, and to have them do almost like a lightning round of interviews with local stakeholders and then sit down and hammer out findings and recommendations. So I think this group has done a really exemplary job of that. We started with kind of a notion that Boulder might need another theater of a certain size. The idea being that the Dairy Center, wonderful facility, hi Melissa, is capped out at about 250 seats, and then you almost immediately go up to Mackey Auditorium and 2,100 seats, and not a lot of venues in between. And that kind of led to a discussion about, well, where would Boulder do a theater? What might that look like? And then just kind of said, we've been scoping this out for about 3 months, and continuing that conversation, it kind of became, well, a theater is a great facility, but it's dark most of the time, it's not used during the day. What kind of a facility could enrich the community, be used every day, every hour of every day, or at least a lot, enhance local businesses, maybe foster the need for more restaurants and cafes as an adjunct to that. And really, we've taken a broader view of culture, especially in the last few years, as being everything from the culinary arts to theater, and a much broader look, and the kind of the classics of culture to embrace things that are happening today, more interactive, more multicultural, certainly, and that all kind of went to the mix. So this week the panel convened. I feel we're extremely fortunate. When we started this process, I went looking for 5 good people in different walks of life related to the arts, and got 5 recommendations of people who are the best in class in our state, and the 5 people I asked are the ones who said yes. So we essentially have a team of 5 #1 draft picks here. And they've been doing a fantastic job. So again, I'm not going to read their bios, but we have Gina Bueller with theater projects here, Michelle Delk, and you're going to meet these folks, so to be speaking, with Snow Hedda, who has spoken in Boulder before, Mark Heiser, the director of venues. I'm sorry about that. I do tend to get in the way of things. Let me go over here. Mark Heiser, Bruce O'Donnell, principal at Starboard Realty, who I got to know well when he was on my board at the Urban Land Institute, and Chris Weinman, an architect with Semple Brands, worked on almost every performing arts center along the Front Range and throughout the state in the last few years. Again, the process was we sat down for a whole day on Tuesday. A lot of people were in this room for interviews. We learned a lot from that, from the community, and I think it went in a different direction than what we might have expected, which you'll learn about in a moment. That's a positive thing. I don't think I think we found the community is not quite ready for a very expensive, large, central facility, but there are ways of approaching this issue in a really creative way to make things happen in a much shorter time period that are accessible, that are financially feasible and viable. And we have some good plans for that to make that happen. So there's our panelists. I think we can go on to the next slide, and then I can stop talking. Oh yeah, big questions. I'm supposed to cover that too. So these are some of the questions we asked. What are the needs of Boulder's creative community? How can we address those needs? Optimal timing. We will have a timeline up here soon. Where should we go? A lot of discussion about sites, interesting sites all around town. We talked about downtown versus more peripheral locations. Who will lead and champion this effort is a huge question that we'll get to today. What are some cost possibilities? Very expensive to build new facilities ground up, about $1,000 a square foot, so that kind of went into our thinking. How can this be made sustainable over time, both environmentally and economically? You don't want to build a facility or create a facility and not have it used, or have an organization that does not succeed. What are some alternative scenarios? And again, what's the timeline? I can tell you right now, it's about 15 years, so at least it's within our lifetimes. So I think we're going to Gina for the next slide.
Sure, thank
We're
you.
going to get some good stuff.
All right. Hello everyone. I'm going to pop back here so we can see everything that's going on. From our 40 interviews, we found out a lot of really fantastic information. It allowed us to set a baseline and some foundations for some of the recommendations that are following here. We had the opportunity to really learn and hear from the community what's happening for you today. We reflected back on the 2014 findings and study and then really tried to say what's happening in Boulder today, and the decisions that are made and the recommendations that are made are really going to impact the next 50 to 100 years of the creative community here in Boulder. So some of those findings that came out of that are really to support these foundational elements that are going to come together. The number one piece of this, and many asked us this, subsidy will be required to make this possible. As we look at a lot of different opportunities and examples across North America, a level of subsidy to make access and affordability something that is at the forefront for our creatives is going to be necessary. There's a lot of different opportunity for subsidy, but the number one thing we want to pop out there for everyone to think about is that subsidy will be important. The city is excited. We had great conversations with some city leaders. There's opportunity for funding, for land, for partnerships, for more synergistic communications to happen moving forward. On the flip side of that, we learned that CU has their needs met. There's a lot of facilities currently available on the university. They have a lot of programs, a lot of students, a lot of faculty. They're spread within the community, but they're not necessarily saying they need more space. They reflected that the community needs more space and that what they have available does not necessarily meet the community needs. But CU isn't necessarily standing up right now as a player to say, give this to us, right? That's a great thing for us as we look at that community impact. Also looking at the philanthropic landscape of what's here in Boulder. An effort like this will mean fundraising for a capital campaign as well as for ongoing operational support. BMOCA has a capital campaign that is currently ongoing, so we looked at really opportunity to balance out there so that as you're looking at that competitive landscape, to balance that out to make sure that opportunity for the community exists. But that is something that we saw needs to be more fully developed. What is that giving potential of the Boulder community today? Where are potentially new gifts that could come from individuals, from corporate entities, and from government that can help really grow this philanthropic landscape that exists? If we were to look at a new facility, a brand new facility, our construction costs today are at about $1,000 a square foot. So if you would imagine a large performing arts center space that could be somewhere between 60,000 square feet up to 100,000 square feet plus for support spaces, just do that math on your own for $1,000 a square foot. So those findings alone and knowing where we are with industry is something that we really truly took to heart, right? It's really great to say, we want the shiny new, oh my gosh, that's what it costs, right? So as we were going through these findings, that's something that came out true for us, is to say, if the end goal is this, is the community ready for this, and does the community need this throughout it? And then as I sort of touched on, a number one thing that came to us was that affordability and accessibility for the local Boulder creative community is very, very important, and that needs to be at the forefront. This is really a infrastructure and a facility and a gathering that's going to be for community and by community. So if we flip to the next findings, because there were a lot that came from 40 people and all of their feedback, the needs expressed, right? We started this whole conversation saying there's a need for a performing arts center complex. What comes next? Support space, rehearsal space, a place to come together, a place to create, a place where the creation is almost more supported than the end product at the end. And this is for performing arts, visual arts, and mixed media, right? This isn't necessarily just the performing arts entities here. We heard a lot of need for the support of how creation is happening. And then it needs to be uniquely Boulder, right? What is something that can be special to Boulder? We have a lot of examples of performing arts complexes across the Front Range, whether that be Lone Tree, Parker, North Glen, a lot of opportunity that's there. So what makes this special and unique to Boulder? You have a huge creative population that's here. How can we look at that and make something that makes Boulder proud of what this can become and just isn't a carbon copy of something else that other communities are doing? There's going to need to be a champion for this idea and someone and some organization to move this forward. As we look at what has happened since 2014, we asked a lot of questions of, well, what has happened? Why hasn't something happened? And it's this idea that no one champion has stepped up to say, we will do this. And coming out of this is a lot of great vision and excitement. However, there needs to be someone in some organization and the community to say, let's go do this. Who's going to champion it? And as we talk about the you throughout this presentation, that really becomes that champion that can lead this forward. And as we look at locations, as we said, we didn't necessarily touch on specific locations of could this be possible here. We really started with the idea of what is the need. As we started talking about the fit for downtown, there are a lot of positives to why this could be located downtown, but there are also a lot of constraints that exist within that. And the number one finding that we came out of with a downtown location is that the cost to build, maintain, and operate and use the space will be significantly more expensive than if it were elsewhere. Because the more it costs up front, the more to recoup and the more to maintain. So when we're thinking about, again, access and affordability, those considerations come in as we look at our findings. And then the third page of all of our findings, go back one for me, Dylan. Okay, perfect. Multimodal is going to be important. This is important to the Boulder community. This was expressed in a lot of different conversations. We don't necessarily want facilities where you have to get into your own car and drive there and park. So what are those opportunities? How can we as a community grow together to make sure that this works for who you are as the Boulder community and how that ties in? We also need to think broadly about what the cultural arts are. We talked a lot about performing arts, we talked about visual arts, but also the culinary arts. How does this come into that? And how does technology come into this as well? Looking at Boulder as that community, really making that definition of what are the cultural arts and what do you want that to be? It also has opportunity for job training elements. We've seen a lot of these pieces around different communities. This can be a place that is fostering creation, but this is also a place that is fostering how we do our jobs within the arts. Whether that be administrators, technicians, creators, everything that comes into it, this can be that hub that fosters that technical training that supports the creative community here today and also supports the ecosystem of what is our cultural arts within North America. So let's talk about the needs quickly. There's a lot of findings that come into this, but what are the needs? Again, we walked into this saying, we need a performing arts complex. Well, what does that really truly mean? Yes, we need a performance space. We need a presentation space, but we need a gathering space. We need a space that the community can come together in and be there. But then how does that work get to that stage, get to that gallery, get to that place? It's all these other pieces that came out. Places to display our arts, community gathering spaces, how we come together, what that means. But then what are those support spaces? There's a lot of organizations who do not have a large infrastructure for their organizations. Some organizations are one person. Some organizations do not have a 501c3 nonprofit status. A lot of the independent artists who are here need a space to come together so that creating is easier for them. So that's a lot of what we heard. Shared services, can benefits be provided? Can basic administrative services be provided? How does healthcare fit into this? Meeting spaces, coming together, supporting each other as cultural creative colleagues. That ended up being a very, very large need that came out. This is something that means space, it means opportunity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen on one site. And this was really exciting to us, so we sort of bulleted those out. Dylan, pop back for me, please, sorry. So we really looked at all of these things that are needed in the community, and what we started to do is say, do these need to happen all together? Can they happen throughout the community, and how is that important? But really, truly, there is a much larger need here that was expressed than just a performing arts center. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to sort of walk through what that means with site and potential.
Thank you, Jenna. So exactly. Again, I want to thank many of you who spent time with us on Tuesday sharing your thoughts. It was a little bit like speed dating, but we certainly couldn't have learned everything about all of you. But what we did learn, and was really easy to quickly understand, is that there is an incredible group of creative, passionate individuals and organizations already here. And what might be seen as actually possibly a challenge is really quite a special opportunity to begin to unpack all of these ideas that we've developed and want to share with you. You are dispersed in many different places throughout your community, throughout the city of Boulder, and that's not necessarily bad. In fact, that can be really great, that there's this vibrancy and energy all throughout the city. However, what we have noticed and what we would like to put forward for you to give some thought to is, while you have these great cultural groups, and these dispersed locations, maybe there are some connections that can be expanded. Right now, you are renting venues, you have limited visibility to your community. Maybe people don't always know what you're doing and all the great work and all the great creation that's happening. It's difficult to book, it's difficult to coordinate calendars. There can be challenges in terms of affordability and costs that you're dealing with, and that's a lot of coordination. So if we go to the next slide, one of the first thoughts that we began to explore is how might you begin to build greater connections with each other? And those connections can be physical. You could start to think about the physical distance or space or ways that you move between different venues, different activities. That can expand in the future to even thinking or imagining new ways of introducing mobility. Maybe one day there's a mobility shuttle that you can hop on and move between different venues. But you also can think about aspects of connectivity that aren't physical. What might you do to have a shared identity, a shared way of expressing all the great work and thinking that's going on? How might you expand experiences that could happen outside, in the streets, in spaces between venues, in the activity, creating activity along the way, creating journeys or experiences that can be shared? And how might you begin to even increase collaboration? I'm sure many of you are already collaborating on events, but what might new possibilities be? And all of this is really something that can happen right away. You can really begin to start to imagine pushing that shared identity, those new connections. And so we were excited about that idea, and I'll end just with one more slide today. That these ideas can really come from your community, come from the artists and the creatives that are already here. This is just an example from an artist in Rhino in Denver, but there's so many possibilities to start to bring life out into the streets, into the public sidewalks, into the parking spaces that maybe can be taken over for a day or for a week. You could start to imagine chalk painting or finding buildings or facades that could be transformed and start to make this identity more visible. So with that, I think I will hand it to Chris. Yes.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks to all of you again for being here and the great input and the way that you made us think about things differently. Adaptive reuse is the title of the slide. And what we talked about within our group was how do we get more value out of the assets that you already have within Boulder. So this facility, which will come back later and is worth a visit or a phone interview, houses multiple organizations and grew out of a county arts council in a community of 67,000 people who said, we need to do more. We need to make the partnerships between our creative groups more real in terms of shared space, shared programs, shared infrastructure. You can see that there's a historic warehouse here on the left and then a new addition. And that's just to spark the idea that there may in fact be existing facilities within the community that would realize some of or meet some of the needs that you all have identified if we work together to achieve that. We can go ahead. So here's another one of those examples. This is very contemporary adaptive reuse of a very historic home in Mexico City as a library. But you can have that connection to the community, the connection to the historic fabric, and the sustainability and the value of utilizing existing facilities. Next. This is the Fort Mason Art Center in San Francisco. This is a surplus military facility. As Mark identified, he said, well, it wasn't much to look at on the outside, but man, look at the inside, how cool this is. This is performance space, artist studios, gallery spaces, education spaces, incredible daylight and gathering space for the community. Next. And this is a facility that Jenna's firm has worked on in Memphis, the Crosstown Concourse. This is a former Sears distribution warehouse, if you recognize the concrete columns. And this is now filled with residences, social services, medical care, as well as arts facilities. There's a performance venue in here and this wonderful concourse in the center atrium that is a party space and a meeting space and a community gathering space. So all different scales, all different kinds, but the thing we don't want to forget is that this can happen outside in the landscape and not just in the buildings. So this is the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, which links a number of cultural facilities within Indianapolis in a great space. You can just, of course, use it to go exercise and get from place to place. You can use it to gain a greater sense of community, or you can use it to get access to a performance or an exhibit. We identified or heard about multiple opportunity sites within Boulder, and we're going to highlight several here for you and just talk about some what-ifs. But what they all have in common over here on the left-hand side is we think that these can be implemented more quickly than the construction of a new standalone cultural center. We think that they can help to activate the civic area, which has been a community priority for a number of years. Importantly, we think that they can develop proof of concept. Hey, are we as a creative community ready to run bigger facilities and manage bigger facilities and fundraise for bigger facilities and program bigger facilities? Well, yes, and we're going to show you how by running them in some smaller facilities. We think we can better utilize some city facilities that probably are not exhibiting their highest and best use right now for a lower capital cost, be more sustainable in terms of their energy use and their embodied carbon in terms of existing buildings, improve public connections among the community, make your work more visible to the community, and importantly, be feasible. So as your programs grow, as you get donors interested, as the community realizes the value that you deliver, that these can be implemented in phases. So we're going to zoom in on each one of those magenta circles and talk about some very specific opportunities that are what-ifs. Bruce?
Thank you, Chris. So Chris talked about adaptive reuse, and I'm sure all of you are well familiar with where the room we're in today, and it might be the best example to think about. Look up at this ceiling, and now it's a performing arts center, it's a theater, it's a stage, it's a rehearsal space. And there's lots of inventory of similar facilities proximate to the cultural center of downtown Boulder, the civic center, and so forth. These adaptive reuse has the benefit of approaching the ultimate goal in incremental steps, in less capital risk, less delivery, time to market issues, those type of things, and the benefit of less material going to a landfill. So one that we've identified is the Atrium building, owned by the city at 13th and Walnut. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. Owned by the city, and kind of there it sits. This image in the lower right, Len Siegel provided us from Historic Boulder, and it's an interpretation of how a large open area could be repurposed, and it could be rehearsal space, performance space, maker space, office space, all of these needs that have been identified. The big, 700-seat theater is kind of the least needed thing in the early going here. And so this might be an example of a place where the shared identity was mentioned earlier, and that our 40 speed dating candidates could assemble in a facility like this to begin the process of the vision we're talking about. Next slide, please. Maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but this is the senior center at 9th and Arapahoe. And again, large open area in the cafeteria, offices, rooms could be individual offices for organizations. It's proximate to downtown. It's, again, similar to the previous building, there it sits. And it is something that might be considered, again, publicly owned.
We are not in, oops, sorry.
Go right ahead, Chris.
We're not insinuating that there's a shortcut between your audiences and a senior center. Okay.
It's a housing opportunity.
Right.
So in the privately owned category, this is the vacant Alfalfa's building at Broadway and Arapahoe. And it has inside a ceiling much like the room we're in, but it's about 3 or 4 times as big. It's open, it could be a black box theater. This list of needs that we've identified and rattled through a bunch already today, rehearsal, maker space, artist studios, all that, there's plenty of room here. And also, there it sits. Privately owned, it's for lease today. Maybe this is something that we're going to use the term you again for a little bit yet today. We have a conversion of you into an entity. But again, well located, tons of parking, big open room, black box potential. Maybe it's a candidate for one of these incremental steps that we're talking about for the shared identity. Then, and I'm going to thank Lynn again, on Tuesday we were for the first time made aware of the also vacant New Vista High School over on Baseline. And, rattle off what's there, gymnasium, a big open space again, auditorium, cafeteria, classrooms that could be rehearsal spaces. We sat all day Tuesday in what I would say would maybe kind of a small to medium-sized conference room for these interviews. And I'll bet you 10 or 12 institutions told us, we need a room just like this. And so here's a school that could be repurposed potentially and might be on the list of opportunities to look at. What's next? BMOCA, another idea. This one is further out in time, certainly. We're well aware and appreciative of what BMOCA is working on and that they need a home for years to come. But again, city-owned. Someday there will be an opportunity to repurpose it and return it to productive use. And maybe it fits into this recipe as well in time again. Next. Okay, this is back to Jenna.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So this then comes into the question
There we go, thank you. How do you run it? How do you pay for it? And what's going to happen inside of it? So what we wanted to quickly walk you through are our governance structure opportunities that exist within the industry itself. And each community needs to find the perfect fit for them. We have a lot of community performing arts and cultural arts centers around the state of Colorado specifically that are government owned and government operated. That's a model that can work for a community, but that's not necessarily a model that we heard was the perfect fit for this community. So quickly just walking you through this chart here, you have basically 3 buckets of potential ownership. Municipal, whether that be the state, the county, the government, something that comes in from the public sector. Then you can have private. We can have a private developer, a private entity that comes in that has land that's developed that is the owner of the space. And then a nonprofit can also be the owner, right? If you can go and you can fundraise and you can buy the land and acquire the land, you can also have a nonprofit entity be an owner. Now, each of these have management structures. So to own a space and to procure a space becomes the vessel. And the things that need to happen within the vessel take a management and an operator. They're the people who are going to work with all of the entities that are around Boulder to make this sustainable and to make this a place that works for everyone. That takes a real special entity. Sometimes that can be public, right? Sometimes that can be an organization that is a part of the city and that operates it there. So as we look at this here, if you're looking at the public ownership, you can have public management. You can have corporate management. This can be Live Nation, Oakview Group, AEG, Z2 does this as well to be local here. It can be that more corporate commercial model that can come in to run it as a business. You can then have the nonprofit model, right? The dairy does this very similarly in that way. Who's your nonprofit that is running it and operating it that can also take in donations? That's a big key piece of your operator being a nonprofit, is for that philanthropic engine to keep going. Now, as you go down to the private land ownership, you'll see this can pretty much be the same. You can have a public-private partnership that can come through. You can have all of these key entities that still can be your managers. Or in the end, you can have a nonprofit and a corporate, or a nonprofit and a nonprofit management and ownership model. There's a lot of options. So what we said is, what's the right fit for Boulder? So if we flip to the next slide, what we think is important is that there is a nonprofit entity, whether a new one or an existing one that grows into this, that becomes the manager and operator of this new trust. This trust is going to be this, in essence, umbrella organization that can support all of those pieces of need. Because the need is so much more than just one facility in space, we want to make sure that a nonprofit can help to host all of this here. Now, a little bit of a larger community, but something that we look at as a really fantastic example, the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust. In the 80s, they were a nonprofit that was formed in order to help renovate a historic space. So they acquired the space, they renovated it, they started to operate it. And then their community and their cultural community said, we need more. So then they went and they acquired more. How did they acquire more? By fundraising, by getting community buy-in and support. That kept growing over time. So the Pittsburgh Cultural Trust became this larger umbrella organization that was the nonprofit that helped to manage and fundraise and support all the entities within Pittsburgh. So we're recommending something very similar to that, and to just cheat off of it, we're calling it the Boulder Cultural Trust for today's purposes. And this is really that nonprofit model that's gonna take charge and move forward. So this becomes an umbrella, right? So your Boulder creative community is gonna be served by this umbrella organization that needs to be formed. This is gonna take care of your services, your infrastructure, find the funding, grant the funding, all of those pieces that come together, and also manage the spaces, whether that be a traditional performing arts center space, streets and walkways, all of that management piece that comes together with it. And as you can see, there's a lot of things that fall under that umbrella itself. And in no specific order, these become the nonprofit entities that exist today, that may exist tomorrow, and all of those independent creators in the community that aren't necessarily formed in a way that can go out to get fundraising support, right? I think many of you independent artists out there may have a hard time going to get grants because you don't have a 501c3. Well, how do you get a 501c3 if you don't have the funding, right? This ongoing loop of what it means to be a creative and that struggle that comes into how we're formed as a society today, this umbrella organization can help Boulder be better with that creative community. These are where the performing arts, the visual arts, mixed media, culinary arts, different partnerships, collaboration, synergy, cohesion, this is where this all comes together under this umbrella. This does not say that any one organization is better than another. This does not pit organizations against each other. This is a collaborative coalition that Boulder builds together to make everything better here. That they can go find the funding, that can acquire the sites, that can help with the design, that can bring everyone together and can say, what we do in Boulder is special and different because we put our cultural creative community first here. We do this by you writing this check to our Umbrella Foundation. This Umbrella Foundation has programs that support it. So no longer am I having to go and write a check here and here and here and here. I can say, I trust you with my funds and my support. Please help the creative community be better. So there's a lot of really fantastic models that we see industry-wide that come into this. But we also want to focus on, this is not just about your traditional art forms, right? We want to reflect on the indigenous communities, the BIPOC creators who are out here, how we're looking at diversity and changing what we do today and what we see on our stages, what we see in our galleries, what we see outside. Where's that creation coming from? Making sure this is not elitist, making sure that this is a place and a community where everyone is welcome. And so that's also very important to be touched in here under this structure. So as we're talking about the needs and how about this all comes together, what was really important for us as a group to say is there has to be someone to take the lead, to champion, to bring this all together. Because all of these pieces are what make Boulder special. Because this is created and then it goes out into the world and comes back as a boomerang. And people can say, oh, you're performing in New York City. Where did you come from? Oh, I came from Boulder, because Boulder supports us as creatives, right? This ongoing loop, this is what makes it special. This is not about four walls of a performing arts center. This is about creating this. And this, for us, is that major takeaway of what comes next. So, popping into the next slide, let's talk about centralizing the venue. Chris?
So all of this doesn't mean that we're giving up on the idea of new performance venues and support for those things. What we're focusing on, however, is creating the conditions that Jenna was just describing that are precursors to making that facility sustainable, active, busy, and successful. The last thing we want to do is to recommend the creation of a building that then everybody says, oh crap, what do we do with it now? And who's going to be in there? So the idea is that we're going to create the situation where this facility becomes inevitable and not risky. Next. So some examples of those, and again, places that you should go visit and talk to. So the Hoff Center is one of those. And you should talk to them about the way that the groups that are resident in that facility partner and collaborate and share resources and staffing and back office and all of those kinds of things. Next. Obviously, there are facilities within this region. The Pay Center at Parker is one of those. You should get familiar with what it costs to run them, what programming they present. The people who operate these facilities within the Front Range are very willing to sit down and open their calendars and their books to you because this is public information. And they are very giving of that as public services, as public servants. Next. Lone Tree obviously built a facility nearly at the same time as Parker. This was a case of two communities who didn't have what you have, right? One of the reasons that they wanted to create these kinds of facilities was because there was a perception that there was no there, that they didn't have a downtown, that they didn't have a community identity, and that this was one way to create that. You're approaching this from a different angle in terms of the enormous reservoir of artists and product that you already have. So maybe your facility and your programming doesn't focus as much on programming brought in from the outside and more on programming generated here within Boulder. Next. Michelle goes.
And we want to also recognize that we don't have a suggestion for you as to where this facility would go. We think that would emerge over time. It needs more study, it needs more thought. But where the facility goes can be such a great addition to the community. We know there are challenges. We have to think about things like floodplain and height limits in areas such as downtown and throughout the city. But also site offers incredible opportunities. So not only can this new future facility become a home that can really enhance and embody the program and the activity that you're looking for, but it can start to do some of those things that we heard from you on Tuesday about creating immersive spaces, connecting to the environment, having something such as natural light. This is a facility that we designed in Kingston, Ontario. It looks out at Lake Ontario, and you can see that in the distance. You can see that connection to nature that can begin to maybe suggest or inform activities and that sort of beautiful connection to place. And everyone knows that Boulder is in a beautiful place. And so we don't know what that looks like yet, but we don't want to overlook how wonderful that can be. And we have one other example, which is, this is the National Opera and Ballet in Norway that our firm designed. And while it again meets the needs of the program and the activity that everyone was looking for, choosing to site this where it is located, if you're not familiar, it sits in central Oslo, right on the fjord. Literally the building is half on land, half in the water. But what that did is it created not only this new performance venue and space for the community, the lobby is open, people can go into the lobby without a ticket, they can enjoy the restaurant indoors, and the rooftop became a new civic space for the city. It became something completely unexpected. And so not knowing exactly what it is okay right now, and actually looking for those new possibilities and that sense of wonder. This happens to be a concert that had 15,000 people on the roof of the opera. So new possibilities can be uncovered through this kind of thinking.
Okay. I drew the short straw. Oh, come on. I get to talk about how to fund it, how to build it, and how to continue to operate it. So I'm giving you a stack of pancakes to look at in case you don't like numbers and want to get bored. The reality is, I think if we want to level set expectations, the idea that the city would be responsible for building the whole thing is not really realistic. What we do know and what we've heard is that the city is very supportive of this effort. And so when we look at things, we look at it in terms of a funding stack. That's the way things are built now. A variety of different creative opportunities that we can take advantage of as part of that umbrella organization and as part of partnership with the city. So at the bottom of the stack is obviously the city's contribution, both in land and in available funds. And I would say, from what we've heard, there is then some early urgency to try to organize this group because there's some timing elements involved in some of the city funding. As we go up the stack, we continue to talk about access to city tax and general fund monies, special district and potential authority tools, and then we get to sort of the private level where we're talking about foundation grants, philanthropy, members like you, corporate sponsorship, naming rights, monetized tax credits. Believe it or not, you can have a nonprofit and have a tax credit that you essentially monetize, and Bruce is an expert at that. And then you also can concern yourself with opportunities for renewable energy and grants that can come from the state for certain projects that are take advantage of those credits. So that is the way you get it built. But once you build it, you have to operate it, and it has to be sustainable in terms of how you operate it. So now we go to a pie. And for the folks at the dairy, this is going to be familiar, and for folks who might be running organizations, it's going to be very familiar as well. But for your average public, I would say they don't necessarily understand the finances of how a performing arts center operates. Again, at the bottom of the pie is government support, steady government support. It's not going to be a lot, but it's not going to be volatile. That's an important piece of it, or you hope that it's not going to be volatile. And then you move into unearned revenues. Unearned revenues are essentially fundraising and philanthropy and other opportunities. And then at the top of the stack, or this slice of pie, is earned revenues through rentals, through ancillary revenue, let's just say parking, even though parking may not be one of them, but it would be bar receipts and so on and so forth. So the thing that more or less corresponds to this, on the expense side, you have facility operations. That includes literally keeping the building open and running, keeping the HVAC running, all of the dull and boring things that you hope that steady state of government support will help fund. And then you have general and administrative expenses, your staff and your copiers and things like that people don't really think about as a cost overhead, but it definitely is. And then, of course, you have program expenses, whether you're presenting, producing, or renting. There's always expenses associated with that. Some of that is recovered by earned revenues, and some of it is not. So the pie is not necessarily equal. Some organizations, depending upon the size of the organization, it can be as much of a third, but quite often earned revenues tend to be the smaller of the piece, actually, depending upon the size of the organization. One thing I did want to mention with regard to earned revenues, one of the things we did here is that it's expensive for an artist to come into a venue, rent the venue, pay for all of the services and so forth. All those services and such, they have to be paid for. The rent has to be paid because all of this has to happen. One thing that the trust can consider is that as a stakeholder, they might be in a better position to take on risk. And what does that mean? That means that instead of a flat rent, which is a very common model, you have a rent that is maybe a basis of rent and then a percentage of the ticket. So smaller organizations that have very low ticket prices, you don't get, the venue doesn't get that much of the revenue. The bigger events, the events that can afford a higher ticket price, the venue can share in a greater share of that expense. And that's sort of a way to level set how the revenue can be generated. It is quite often a model where you see commercial and non-commercial or non-profit rates. The challenge with that is that you might have a small wine tasting, and that organization is a for-profit organization, but all of a sudden they're paying for-profit rates, and yet they're very small. And yet, on the other hand, you might have a private hospital or a nonprofit hospital, huge operation, they'll do a fundraiser, but they're getting a nonprofit rate. So I would challenge this group to think about rethinking how equity is applied to how rents work. And now I think I'm done. Yep. Who's next?
All right, I guess I'm next. So, Michael at the beginning said it's going to be 15 years before anything happens. And everyone said, oh, right? But that's the reality. A lot of what we do in our day-to-day professional lives is to help people strategically plan for the future. Because as artists and creatives and administrators, we execute all of the time, right? We plan, we see it, it's tangible, it's there. How we're planning for a sustainable and successful future takes time. So the challenge for us as we looked at this to say, okay, what's 15 years? There's great need in this community today, so how do we cut this off first? How do we not just come to this community and say, hey, you all have a great idea and a lot of need, we'll see you in 15 years, right? That's not gonna get anyone what you need, and that's gonna be a significant challenge when it comes to fundraising, right? We need to see it tangibly happening, and we need to support the creative community today, right? The urgency of now is here, it's in front of you. The 2014 report said that. So instead of saying to you, wait another 15 years, what we wanted to do is sort of propose a plan that incrementally helps you get there, that starts to grow the foundation and gets you to that end point of something new and big and shiny, but that along the way supports that creative community and helps to grow capacity while at the same time proving concept, right? So you can test out these concepts and you can say to the community, to the donors, to the city, we need this and this is why. So let's go over here. Let's start here. We're in 23 and 24. This is coming here. If you haven't checked, it's December. So in 2023 and 2024, what needs to happen is that the you needs to be formed, right? This leadership, this buy-in, who is going to carry this forward needs to be formed. That decision within your community to move it forward starts pretty quickly if you want to get this accomplished. Then we want to start looking at where the funding sources can come in, who can receive the funds, who can grant them out, who can start talking about partnerships, what is the availability of some of these ideas of pop-ups that we had for some of those city-owned spaces. Start those wheels going. That happens immediately in 2023. This is going to include some staffing, so that funding need and support is going to come pretty quickly. The Create Boulder team is all volunteers right now. There's a lot of organizations in town who are all volunteer. So looking at what that professional staffing opportunity is that can help move this forward is something that's going to be important. But then let's get people into spaces. Let's get office spaces. Let's get rehearsal spaces. Let's get the creation happening. That happens for us in this plan right away in 2023 and 2024. Then that test concept, that proof of concept comes through and you can say, yes, we can do this. Give us money, right? Because that in the end is what needs to happen. We need more money. Money helps all of this to happen. All great ideas stall out if someone's not able to provide those dollars. So then that goes to where we see here in the orange, right? We're getting red, the embers are there, we're starting this fire. We're gonna plan, we're gonna figure out that true viability of what the need is. We've done the pop-ups, we've done the activations. What is that true need and what are we building? How can we challenge some of these utilization ideas and develop the plan for the rest of the space that's needed? And then we need to keep fundraising. We need to get those plans in place. We need to figure out that end feasibility plan for what's happening. But that said, Everything that we started here in 2023 and 2024 keeps on going. It keeps going in the spaces. You get new and different spaces that are happening, right? We looked at the senior center, we looked at the atrium. Those are spaces in our mind that as soon as the city could say, yes, it's vacant and you can get in here, you can do that. In 3 to 6 months, you can be in a space creating, right? Something like the grocery store may take a little bit more time, so that may be something that happens and gets fit out along the way. How housing and affordable artist housing fits into this and where this comes in, all of that's happening here in these years. Then as we get into 29 through 33, the green years, right? This is capital campaign time. This is going out to the community to say, look, we're doing it. Now we need more. Write the check. Here's the plan. Here are the renderings. Here's the design. Here's the property. Here's the site. All of that is happening here. Potentially by this point, there's opportunity for the BMOCA site. There may be opportunity for the high school site to happen, right? Depending on how all of that is going. That's gonna happen here in these green years. Then we're gonna get to 2034 to 2038, which sounds so far away. But that really is where the meat is happening. So you're finishing your design, you're getting ready for construction, you're staffing more, and you continue to fundraise. You may be at the home stretch of the capital campaign, but now you have to start that operational endowment. You need to start figuring out how you're paying for the operation of the space, while also still supporting everything that's been happening here. So as you can see, this is a wheel that keeps moving forward, and then in the golden year of 2039, you have everything that you wanted, or at least that you hope you wanted. The question becomes for us, what's the want versus the need? That right now is the want. This is the need. So for us, that became the most important part of this plan, is to solve the need now and develop into the why of the want, to make sure that the want is exactly what this community needs. Because as it gets bigger, that impacts your next 50 to 100 years of the creative community here within Boulder. So we're not saying it's wrong, we're saying that this is the need right now. So start solving the need to move it all forward to help support what happens here. Now, the ultimate piece of this, money solves everything, right? So if you don't want to wait till 2039, and we can get some big checks in here, right? You can move that forward. If there's more money that comes, it's possible. But what we want to be realistic about is not getting in the way of what BMOCA is trying to do, looking at what else needs to happen for fundraising in this community, knowing that there are a lot of nonprofit organizations here that count on every single dollar. So not getting in the way of that, and making sure that the community has the plan to move forward so that it is a successful community campaign for everyone involved, and then it's not impacting anything else. So that's why we put it at a 15-year. This could be 7, it could be 10, but it's gonna take someone standing up with that checkbook saying, yes, we can do this, match these millions of dollars that I'm putting through. Because if we go back to that figure that we threw out at the beginning of $1,000 a square foot, at 80,000 square feet. That's in today's dollars, right? We're seeing 20% price escalations. Those are the things, the numbers that become real and become scary to us, that say, let's start with the need, and let's get to the want. So, I'm gonna turn it over to Michael, because I hope I haven't scared you all about 15 years. We're gonna talk about what comes next and what you all need to do kind of coming out of here. So Michael, I'll toss it back to you.
Thank you, Jenna. I don't recall saying this was going to take 15 years. I think I said, how's everybody doing? It's important to note that this is a brainstorming process. This is an idea session. This is not a government organization that's telling people what to do. It's really we've been receiving ideas thanks to all your generosity and coming in for the interviews on Tuesday and being here today. And a lot of this will be codified in a report that Create Boulder and I will produce probably in about the next month. And we'll tease out some of these ideas. They'll be a little bit more fleshed out, and that'll be available to everyone. There's also going to be a video recording of the session that we'll be able to share with people who aren't here today. So I'm going to summarize some recommendations, thank some people, and talk about next steps, and then we'll take some Q&A. So the way I hear this presentation, which came together very quickly, by the way, the first step is to grow that champion. You know, we talked about this cultural trust. That's a pretty big undertaking. Where do you start? It seems like a group needs to convene some stakeholders in a smaller working session than we did on Tuesday. One idea we threw out was, board members from arts organizations sitting down and thinking, how do we forge this new entity that's going to create the umbrella structure that we've talked about extensively here. Accessing the funding sources as possible is important. We don't need to get all those funding sources in place, but time is in the essence in regard to some of those. So we need to start nailing down some of the funding. The adaptive use strategy, I think, is really exciting. Again, it meets a lot of Boulder's environmental and placemaking goals to do that. Think of some of those buildings when they're dressed up for artists and artistic uses, they could become very exciting places. And the 15-year timeline that Jenna just outlined, it sounds like a long time, but I've been involved in a lot of 15, 30-year master plans, and a lot of those places exist now. And, it's exciting, it happens. But the important thing is to really get started, like Monday. You don't want to let these ideas sit for too long. You want to start actuating them. So we were very fortunate to have the volunteer help of a student at CU Boulder, John Katzman, who's a student in urban design. It really helped with all the research and putting together the PowerPoint. And I'm really grateful to get to know this young man from Fort Collins. He came from my friend John Hersey's class, and I think a lot of those class members are here. CU Planning and Environmental Design session. Jan Burden and Deborah Malden, of course, did a great job with Create Boulder organizing this whole session and have been fantastic partners. Sina Sen and Tom hosted our group on Wednesday at the Highland City Club, and we had a wonderful working session. All of the interviewees, of course, a lot of whom came back today, are panelists who have just been fantastic to work with, as I mentioned. Thank you to E-Town. It's great to be here in E-Town. I've always wanted to be in E-Town, and now I can say I have been. And of course, all your attendees and your patience as we resolved our technical difficulties. So I think we're ready for Q&A now. And Jan, do you want to? I'm sorry, I must have
Remember to acknowledge the chamber.
Oh yes, the Boulder Chamber. Of course, we did the interviews there. Thank you, Boulder Chamber. And anybody who wants to ask a question.